sins, my fears, and my failures. Your grace overwhelms like a flood straight from heaven, and your hope opens eyes to the floodgates of heaven. Jesus, come on the earth, let the heavens proclaim your word. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise. Overthrow is the power of darkness. Oh, darkness lost its hold when you came with your kindness and your goodness. Your love breaks the chains of my heart, of my mind, and your power sets free all the captives, and you bring peace. Jesus, King of the earth, let the heavens proclaim your word. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise. Jesus, King of the earth, let the heavens proclaim your word. The one true God defeated the grave. We join with angels and sing your praise. My soul will sing. My soul will praise you. My soul will sing. And my soul will praise. Went out, and death had claimed this victory. The King of love had given up his life. The darkest day in history. There on the cross they made for sinners. For every curse, his blood atoned. One final breath, and it was finished. Lift up your shout, there's joy all of heaven singing. We sing holy, we cry holy, we shout holy, holy. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. The Savior of the world.
By a quick show of hands, I think I have a guess about how many hands are about to go up. How many of you have ever applied for a job? Okay, that's a pretty good solid percentage of you. I know I have one friend who he's in his early 40s now, and he always talks about how he's applied for pretty much like 2 jobs in his entire life, and they were both like in high school and college, and then ever since then he's just been offered jobs for his whole life. People will just be like, "Hey, you want to work for us?" And I was like, "Well, that must be nice, just having people offer you jobs all the time." But most of us normal people have to apply for the jobs that we get. And if you've ever applied for a job, you've probably read these job postings. Maybe Indeed seems to be the website of choice anymore that everyone puts their jobs on. And when you have a job posting, you'll usually have like a little job title line at the top, and then you'll have a list of duties, responsibilities that this job entails, right? It'll be the job description. And then at the very bottom, there's a list of qualifications, the things that they are looking for in order for someone to do this job. They want people who have already done a certain amount of things. And if you've ever gotten to the point of like real desperation in looking for a job, which I have been in that place where it's like I desperately needed a job or desperately needed a new job, you kind of sometimes start skipping the job description part and just look for the qualifications to see if there's any chance on earth that you might actually get hired for this job. And I don't know, I've applied for jobs that I read the qualifications for. It's like, there is no chance on earth these people are going to hire me for this job, but I want to do this job, so I'm going to apply for it anyway. Never got hired for any of them, but I tried. But many of us know that feeling of applying for jobs or maybe doing a job search and looking at the qualifications and just feeling like no matter where I look, I cannot find a job that actually I'm qualified for, apparently, especially if it's early on in your career. I know I definitely had that struggle where the classic joke among my age group is you graduate college and all the entry-level jobs require 5 years of experience. And you're like, So how am I supposed to get the 5 years of experience to get an entry-level job in the first place? No one really ever explains that process to us. On the flip side, though, some of us have also found ourselves in jobs, one way or another, that we weren't qualified for. I've been turned down by jobs that I wasn't technically qualified for, but I've also been in positions that I didn't really feel qualified for. Most recently, at my current role, I came into the food bank, the Chattanooga area food bank, which is where I work until Tuesday, but it's where I work right now. And I came in February a couple years ago, and 4 months later, the CFO, so I came in as a senior accountant, the CFO decided to resign. And I had been there 4 months and was his second in command. So basically it was like, oh, so you're going to now be the CFO until we find a new one. And I had been there 4 months, and I was like, cool, that sounds like that will go well. So that was very much one of those situations in the other way, where it's like I was doing a job that I was like, I'm not qualified to do this job, and kind of go through the stress of guessing your way through what you're doing every day and hoping that it turns out okay. But even if you've applied, maybe you've applied for jobs that you didn't feel qualified for, maybe you've done jobs that you didn't feel qualified for. But even if we get outside of the world of jobs at all, there's a good chance that you've just been in situations in your life that in one way or another you did not feel qualified to handle. That maybe you were facing a situation, maybe a responsibility just fell into your lap that you were not asking for. Maybe a problem or a challenge came up out of nowhere and you simply did not feel at all qualified to handle what was before you. And yet, it was your responsibility to do something about. Today, we're going to look at the story of a famous story, biblical story, of someone who did something that by all accounts they did not appear qualified to do. And it's the story of David and Goliath. And we all know this story. I'm hoping to take a slightly different spin on it than we're used to, but we pretty much all know this story to some degree. And in this story, ultimately, someone who seems unqualified to do the job is the person who ends up getting the job done. But before we jump into this story that we're all probably somewhat familiar with, I want to start with a question. I want to make sure this story is as practical and real and personal to each one of us as possible. And so my question is, what is your Goliath? Most of us are not actually fighting a literal giant. But for us today, Goliath is anything before us, anything that is in our lives that we are facing that makes us feel completely unqualified to handle. Anything that we look at and say, this is too big for me. I can't do this. I can't handle this. It could be any list of things. It could be a problem that has occurred. It could be a job or some other kind of life responsibility that you have. It could be an addiction or a sinful habit that you are trying to break. It could be some unexpected challenge or obstacle that has come up in your life. It could even be an opportunity, a good thing. It could even be a dream that you've longed to fulfill, but now that the opportunity is presented to you, you are scared that you will not be able to fulfill it. It could be broken relationships around you. It could be any number of things. And if you are a person who is facing a Goliath today, it probably isn't too hard for you to think of it. It's probably pretty quick comes to mind that this is the thing that I don't feel qualified to handle. This is the thing that feels too big for me today. Whatever that thing is, that is your Goliath. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go throughout this message today. And I want to start by looking at our text, The story of David and Goliath is in 1 Samuel 17, and we're going to start by looking at a little bit about Goliath himself. So we're going to start by reading verses 4 through 7. And this is what it says. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. Don't worry, I'll interpret that later. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. I'll also explain that. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, not actually really sure what that is, and the bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Okay, so that's a bunch of things that don't really make sense in American language. Here's what it's saying. Goliath is really big and really strong. We're going to do this whole updating things for Americans today. He's really big and really strong. The height is basically 9 foot 9 inches. Really, really big. As in, if he is standing beside a full-size basketball goal, his head is almost touching the rim. That's really big. The breastplate that he is wearing, just the armor covering his torso, weighs 125 pounds. There are full-grown people in this room who do not weigh 125 pounds, and he is wearing it. The point of his spear, not his whole spear, the point of his spear is 15 pounds. There are also people in this room who would struggle to bicep curl 15 pounds, and this guy can hurdle it at a long range. In other words, he's big and strong. In addition to being big and strong, if we jump to verse 10 of this chapter, we see a little bit more about him. Every day he's been coming out to face the armies of Israel, basically challenging them to send their best soldier to him, have a basically duel of 2 champions, and whoever wins, they win as the representative of their entire army. And every day he would come out and say, the Philistine would say, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Goliath's pretty confident in himself, too. He is bold, he is brash, he's big, he's strong, and I think he knows it. He's not too worried about whatever soldier Israel sends his way. And he actually is probably pretty confident they're not going to send anybody because they're all going to be too scared of him. Goliath is not to be trifled with, and no one in the Israelite army feels qualified at all to be the one to fight him. If we look at verse 11, we hear how the Israelite army responds to Goliath's challenge. It says, "On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified." And if we jump to verse 25, we can read a little bit more of what they were doing. The Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man, Goliath, keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." So Saul's coming out and giving this challenge. Everyone in Israel is running away scared. So much so that Saul is offering an extremely massive reward to the person who would be willing to fight, and he still can't find anybody. Think about this. He is offering wealth. He is offering marriage to his daughter, which is basically a place in the royal family. He's offering no taxes. There are people in this room who would fight 5 Goliaths to not pay taxes for the rest of their lives. He's offering no taxes, and they still can't find somebody to fight him. That tells you how terrified these people are. They're pretty much saying, well, that's a great reward, but I'm going to be dead, so it doesn't matter, right? They have no confidence in their own ability to handle Goliath. And I wonder if we were to write a job description called Goliath Killer, right? We're posting this on Indeed. We're writing one Goliath killer needed. It's posted by Saul, right? The compensation is great wealth, my daughter in marriage, and no taxes. And we were to list the qualifications we were looking for, what would we write? The thing is, we know where the story's going, but if you try to forget for a second that we know who's going to be the person to kill Goliath, and just try to think of this objectively, what would you want from somebody who's supposed to kill a giant? Maybe an experienced warrior, right? Someone who knows how to fight. I would want someone who knows how to fight. Possibly, I want somebody who has a high military position because that reflects on their long-term service in the military, right? This tells me they are experienced. This tells me they have had a lot of success fighting battles, right? It's basically, I'm looking for 5 years of experience in something close to giant killing. Here's another one. I would also like my person to be very big and very strong. We know he's probably not going to be Goliath big and strong, but I would like somebody pretty big and pretty strong to fight against the giant that we have to kill. What's interesting here is there's actually somebody on the battlefield who meets all these qualifications. His name is Saul. If you drop back the last few chapters of 1 Samuel, we read of Saul conquering multiple enemies. He has experience as a warrior, and he's won a bunch of victories. He is the king. He is the highest-ranking military official there is. He's supposed to be the one leading this army. He really should be the champion who's going out to fight Goliath, not the one shirking his own responsibility by offering a reward for someone else to do it. Also, the Bible tells us that he's a head taller than everybody else in Israel. In other words, he's a big dude. He's not 9'9", but he's big. He's probably the second biggest person on the battlefield. So we actually have someone who meets the qualifications that we might be looking for a giant killer, and yet he has no interest in fighting this giant. As it turns out, the things that we might put as the job qualifications for a giant killer might be a little different than the things God is looking for. The things that you might put on your list of what it will take, of the type of person it will take to overcome your Goliath, might be pretty different than the things God is looking for to overcome your Goliath. So let's look at God's job description. The thing is, God is ultimately the one who has to hire the giant killer, right? The Goliath killer job hiring manager is God. So he's the one who ultimately has to decide what qualifications we need to meet in order to hire the right person. So let's see what's on his list. Number 1, he needs to be a shepherd. 1 Samuel 17:15 tells us that David went back and forth from Saul on the battlefield to tend to his father's sheep at Bethlehem. He's not even on the battlefield as a soldier. He's having to split his duties between serving Saul, because at this point he had begun playing music for Saul and serving him, and tending for his sheep. So he's actually somewhere between a shepherd and a musician. We're probably like, okay, interesting choice, God. You want a shepherd musician. Cool. What else we got on this list? How about someone who's really young? Verse 33, after David tells Saul, I'll fight Goliath, Saul says, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. So he's young, meaning he's not experienced. He's not an experienced warrior. He also has no military position at all. He's not even a soldier. Which brings us to our third and maybe most interesting job qualification. How about this one? He's only at the battlefield because his dad told him to bring his brothers some sandwiches for lunch. If you look at verses 17 and 18, we find out why David's here at all. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them." He's literally only knows about Goliath and this challenge because he was bringing snacks for his brothers. That's the reason he's here. Frankly, at this point, I'm starting to question God's job qualification list. I'm starting to think this is probably not going to work out very well. This doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the thing about God's job qualifications list is that he knows some things that we don't know. You see, there's a couple other things that he knows about David that we have yet to find out. For example, he knows that David is a lion and a bear killer. In verses 34 and 35, after Saul tells David he cannot fight Goliath, that he has no chance, David says to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." Whoa, didn't see that one coming from the harp-playing shepherd. But he's also a lion and bear killer, which is also why he has the kind of courage it takes to actually fight Goliath. Because he knows he's already won battles he was completely unqualified to win. He had no business killing a lion with his bare hands. No human has any business doing that, but he did it. So he has courage to do what he knows he's not really qualified to do. There's another thing that God knows about David that we have yet to find out. And that is that David is an expert with a sling. In verse 40 of chapter 17, we read that David took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in hand approached the Philistine. David's weapon of choice was a sling. Now, just to make sure there's proper understanding here, we're not talking about the little things that you pull back and the things that you might buy for a 10-year-old today. Not exactly the same thing. Slings were actually legitimately dangerous weapons. But the reason he was an expert with a sling was not because he was a soldier. It's because he was a shepherd. Shepherds used slings during this time. Shepherds used slings to protect their flock. The reason they liked slings, there was a few reasons they liked slings. One, they're extremely easy to carry. It's just this basically piece of leather that you could tie to your sleeve, you could put in your pocket or in your bag. Extremely easy to transport. You're not carrying around a big old bow and arrows, not trying to lug a big spear around. It's very easy to move. The other part is that you have basically unlimited ammo. You can find it anywhere. You just got to find a big rock and stick it in there, and you're good to go. Another reason is because it was a long-range weapon. And so you could see, maybe if some wolves were starting to eye your sheep, you could try to hit them from 100 feet away before they ever got close. You could scare them away before they ever got near your flock. God seems to know this about his Goliath killer. But why does being a sling expert really matter? Well, let's read about the actual fight that happens between Goliath and David in verse 48 and 49. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. In other words, David killed Goliath before Goliath ever got close to him. If you want to beat someone in battle, and you know they are way bigger, way stronger, and probably better at hand-to-hand combat than you, what do you want to do? You want to kill them from a distance. You want to beat them before they ever get up close to you. As it turns out, David's an expert with a long-range weapon that he can use to defeat somebody before he ever gets close to him. He also just happens to have the irrational courage that he needs to try it. The point is, David is uniquely and specifically qualified to defeat Goliath. And the reason he was specifically and uniquely qualified was because he was a shepherd. The very thing that most of us would have looked at on his resume and said, this is not a Goliath killer. Like if I was hiring this position and I got David's resume and the first thing it said was shepherd, I'd be like, yeah, we're not hiring this guy to kill a giant. The very thing I would have used to dismiss David as unqualified to kill Goliath is the very place God had prepared him to kill Goliath. He built up his courage by killing a lion and a bear, which is why he was brave enough to fight him. He became an expert with a sling by being a shepherd, which is why he could do it from long range and actually win the fight. We don't look at qualifications the way God does. We don't know the whole picture. So the good thing is, God's the one making the hire, not us. God's the one deciding who is the right person to kill Goliath. So, I want to ask again, what is your Goliath? What is that thing that you are facing that you feel completely unqualified for? That the people around you would tell you you are unqualified for? That the world would say you do not have the qualifications for? What is the thing that makes you feel too small, too insignificant, and unable to deal with? What is your Goliath? But I also want to ask a second question. What is your sling? Your sling is the thing that you are uniquely equipped with that will be the key to defeating the Goliath in front of you. The thing that might get overlooked by others, the thing that might get overlooked by you, the thing that a lot of people might not know about, the thing that might not even come to your mind, but the thing that God wants to use for you to defeat your Goliath, the weapon that you are already equipped with that you can use to win this fight. Many of you are facing a Goliath, and you probably feel like the armies of Israel. Feel like the way the armies of Israel felt facing the original Goliath, which is the OG Goliath. Outmatched and undersized is probably how they felt. You probably feel outmatched and undersized for the problem in front of you. Feel unqualified for this fight. But as we have talked about today, the list of qualifications you may think is necessary to defeat the Goliath in front of you is not going to match the list of qualifications that God put together. And the good news is, God's also the one who decides the right person to defeat your Goliath. God's the one in charge of making the hire, so he gets to decide what qualifies you and what disqualifies you. And I believe that if God had written out a job description titled Your Personal Goliath Killer, you would be pretty surprised reading it. I think you'd be surprised because if you started reading the job qualifications, you'd say to yourself, whoa, it's like this job was intended just for me. It's like this job was made with me personally in mind to be the one to win this fight. Be reading through the qualifications, thinking to yourself, wow, I must be perfect for this job. It's like it was designed for me. And I believe that's because it was designed for you. Your Goliath is not a surprise to God. The thing you are facing, God is not shocked by. And because God knew you were going to face this Goliath, God has prepared you for this battle. However, the preparation may not look like what you would think it should have looked like. Just like God prepared David to kill the original Goliath by making him a shepherd, so he has prepared you, but maybe not in the way you would have expected. It's possible that there's something you even dismiss, some part of your past, some part of your experience, things that you say, these are things I'm good at, but they can't help me with this battle. I'm not the right person for this battle. Maybe even the things you're dismissing of yourself, the reasons you're coming up with to disqualify yourself from fighting the Goliath in front of you may actually be the very key that God wants to use to defeat the Goliath in front of you. Today, I want to tell you, you are already equipped, prepared, and chosen to fight the Goliath that is facing you. So again, I ask you, what is your sling? What is the unique gift, the unique talent, the unique experience, the unique preparation God has put you through that will allow you to win this fight? One thing that throws us off from winning our battles is that we often try to fight our battles someone else's way. That happens in this story as well. In verses 38 through 39, David has just convinced Saul to let him go fight Goliath. And this is what Saul does. Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul. I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Saul tried to get David to fight Goliath the way Saul would have fought Goliath. But Saul wasn't the person God had hired for the job. Saul did not meet the qualifications that God had put on his list. David did. And if David had tried to fight Goliath Saul's way, he probably would have lost. Because the very thing that gave David the advantage was that he could fight him from a distance, was that he wasn't bogged down with armor. His vision wasn't blurred by a helmet. If he had tried to do everything the way Saul would have done it, it would have actually removed the advantage David had over Goliath. What I'm saying is stop trying to fight your battle someone else's way. Stop saying that if only I was like them, if only I could do what they could do, if only I had their abilities, then I would be able to win this fight. If only I was more like them, then I would pursue this dream. If only I had what they had, if only I had more money, more gifts, more friends, more talent, more time. Your fight was not created to be won by someone else. It was created for you to win. So stop trying to use other people's weapons. God has already equipped you. And you're the person who's supposed to win this fight, and you can win this fight. Last week we talked about how God will win the fight, and that's true, but it doesn't mean that you have no responsibility. David even says it. I don't have the verses, but in this passage, he even says, as he's about to charge Goliath, the battle is the Lord's. He says that as he's charging, meaning, I recognize God's the one who wins this fight, but I'm the vessel through which he wins. So just because God's the one who wins doesn't mean you don't have to fight. And some of us need to get into the fight. And we need to use the sling, the thing that God has equipped you with. We need to use that weapon, take it into the fight, and watch God bring the victory. So in closing, if you have a Goliath, you've probably already thought of it by now. And the truth is, I don't think the details and this very specific part of the message, I don't know if it's going to be for everyone. But I believe wholeheartedly that there are some people in this room who, when I brought up the idea of having a Goliath, something in your life that you are facing that you feel completely unqualified to handle, that there are some people in this room who something came to their mind immediately. There was no second guessing. There was no, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. No, it was like, yeah, this is it. This is what's in front of me. And if you know that, what your Goliath is, I believe today God wants to show you what your sling is. He wants to show you the weapon that he has given you that you can use to defeat this Goliath. Remember, God does not look at qualifications the way that we do. So what he might tell you might not be what you expected. It might not make any sense, actually. It might make about as much sense as choosing a shepherd to kill a giant. And yet, that actually turned out pretty well, didn't it? So we're going to take a moment and we're going to ask God to show us. If you know what your Goliath is, I want you, just in these next few minutes, I'm going to pray, and we're just going to take some time to ask the Lord, what is my sling? What have you equipped me with? What is the weapon I need to use to win this battle? So I'm going to pray, and then we're just going to take a couple minutes and listen for ourselves. Father, we know there are many battles in this room. We're all facing something. And God, right now, I'm just asking that you would speak to your people and that you would show us. Show us the way you have equipped us, the weapon you have given us to use to win the battle we are currently in. Show us how you have equipped us to defeat the Goliath currently in front of us. God, we just ask that you speak to us now. Holy Spirit, come and speak to us now as we open ourselves up before you. I feel like I need to also mention the fact that Goliath and all giants are scary. Like, there's a reason why the Israelites were so afraid. It's because he was bigger and stronger than everybody there. So if you feel afraid of the giant in front of you, that is not to be surprised by. The giant probably appears bigger and stronger than you. So of course you feel afraid. But I truly believe today that there are battles in this room that have not been won simply because we've been too afraid to fight them. If David could have given in to fear just like everybody else, and if he had, they never would have won that battle. Because the battle is the Lord's, and you need to remind yourself every day that the battle is the Lord's. But you need to have the courage to fight it. To get into the fight, declaring the battle is the Lord's, and fight anyway. And watch him bring victory. As big as any giant is before you, fear might be a bigger giant. And we have to overcome that fear. We have to get over the fear that keeps us from getting in the battle in the first place. Because once you get in the battle with the weapons God has given you, with his presence on your side, you will get the victory. Again, we don't know how that victory looks. We don't know exactly how he's going to bring it about. But he is the God who wins victories. That's what he's going to do. But you have to get into the battle. You have to overcome the fear and step out in faith, declaring the battle is the Lord's, and I'm going to fight it with him. And he's going to fight it with me.